Hey Legionnaires, Omegon Edge here and welcome back to another video. In this video we finally take on the Alpha Legion and I'm going to show you exactly how I paint them up in my cyan blue scheme. Let's get into it. A huge Alpha Legion fan would be a massive understatement. I have been into Alpha Legion pretty much ever since I got back into the hobby, and in the probably like the past 7 years I have been painting Alpha Legion pretty much exclusively. I've done multiple armies, so much so that I've ended up restarting them, selling them off and starting them again, and to the point where Games Workshop themselves sent me down and many other creators to their Horus Heresy event, and that allowed me to get on this list to paint things early and to share my passion with a lot more people. I've commissioned artworks for the Alpha Legion, some of my favorite characters such as my idea of Shidranko, Kel Silonius, and even my Ingo Peck, which I absolutely loved, and this was by my friend Art Priest, who I'd asked to kind of bring Ingo Peck to life. And if we'll actually ever get a model of him, well, remains to be seen, but I'm really looking forward to the day. During the COVID years, I got into the idea of the Efret stealth squad, and I ended up popularizing the squad so much so that we were even able to get rules in the game, and here's some artwork to go alongside it. So yeah, I really love Alpha Legion. I love their character, I love their colors, I love their kind of Spec Ops meets genetically engineered superhuman space marines. So for me it's just really cool. I just really like how they play in the game, as well as just their whole way of doing things. So sneaky, but getting behind enemy lines, sabotaging, and then attacking all at once. I absolutely love. So when I was asked by Child of Fang to do a Alpha Legionnaire for the charity event, I basically jumped up and I said, yep, that's absolutely what I'm doing, I'll do it. And I wanted to do something simple because a lot of people have been asking how I paint my Alpha Legion, and I wanted to do something simple so it would be easy for you guys to replicate. So hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get into the painting. We'll be using both acrylics and oils, so hopefully you'll find it useful. So although I've been using these colours for many years now, I still like to look back at art and see what I can take and use them as references. So for example, in this image, you can see the really bright areas where the cyan turns into an almost green. There's a lot more green in the colour. And then we go down to this kind of faded blue. And then this also reflection of the elements of a very dark green in the shadows. Now for this tutorial I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm just probably going to use the kind of mixture between the cyan and the dark blue. Although there's red in this image, which I think is extremely beautiful, I would like to use that at some point, but I won't be using it in this because we could go crazy. So all I'm showing you this for is just trying to keep it authentic as Alpha Legion can be, I suppose. But I thought that this would be a really nice idea to kind of set the mood for what we're going to be going for, and then we can replicate this in our models. But if you do want to use red or purples, I mean, go ahead, use it in the shadows, use it in the highlights. We'll get a really nice effect. And please share with me when you've actually, if you do use this tutorial, share with me what you create. I'd love to see it. Okay, finally, let's get into the painting. So I start off with Halford's primer, and this is the grey primer, which is pretty cheap. You can buy it from Halford's Automotive, and it works perfectly on miniatures. And the reason I really like it is because it's very durable and very cheap. So here though, I apply over that contrast paint. The name will come up on the bottom of the screen, and you'll see that it goes on really nicely over this grey primer. Now I've done a kind of, I wouldn't say half job, but what I wanted to do is get the main highlights in. I kind of sprayed at a 40 degree and 45 degree angle, and then I started applying that contrast all over the model, and I've left some areas in light and some areas in shadow. That's because I like to work in the 4-quarter painting or highlight method, which basically splits up with the front and back angles, diagonal angles being in the light and then the opposites being in the shadows. So that's where you'll get your shadows, and you'll see me make more sense of that as I begin painting the model. But here we're just applying that base coat. So once the base coat is done, I then take I think it's a Baden black contrast paint, and I start applying that on. At first here though, I tried to use abyssal black, and I found that it kind of gave me a greyish tone instead, but it does dry really matte, so I decided to go with it. It's also got a tiny bit of blue in it, and the color temperature that I'm going for here is on the colder side, so it kind of makes more sense to go for like a kind of bluish black. So quite similar to like a Payne's grey in a way, if you're familiar with artist paints. I do the same thing with the bolt gun, and I'm not too worried about the areas that will be metallic. We'll be painting those up in N&M anyway, and I'll just show you a really quick way of doing that, because this is mainly for army painting. If you are into something a bit more catered towards display painting, however, I'm actually working on this Alpha Legionnaire over on my Patreon channel. The main focus is to take this to a competition, and I'm working through each segment. So I've split it up into the color, the scales, and each other element of the model. And if you're into more higher quality and high level, where I really take my time and I go through each detail, then be sure to check it out. Actually, it's been super fun painting in this way. It allows me to complete a model to a high degree, and then we'll have something to share at the end of it. The Patreon is mainly focused around really teaching you guys how to paint with both oils and acrylics to a really high quality, and just to give you the tools you need to take your painting to the next level. We also do monthly challenges for you guys to join in as well if you're interested, just to help everyone grow together and learn together, where we give each other feedback and just direct each other as well. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. Alright, back to the video. Once I'm done with the base coat there, you see a really dark blue, and that's actually Imperial Blue from AK Interactive, one of their intense colors that you can get from their basic set. Brilliant set, comes with pretty much every color you would need, and we're going to keep this model pretty simple. Now, before, when I used to work with an airbrush or when I was doing my army painting, I actually used a color called Steel Blue by Vallejo Game Color. I don't think that color actually exists anymore since Vallejo changed their kind of formula. So I think this is a really good substitute to use instead. Now, the key thing is that what I'm doing is I'm applying it to this darker blue into all the areas where I'm going to be having those shadows. So the areas that will be receiving light will get the brighter turquoise, but the areas that will be in shadow will be hit with this darker blue. We could also go in with a violet if we really wanted to, but I'm just going to be working with this really basic set to make it easy. But you can obviously take what I'm doing here and make your own. Now, the key thing here is to work in thin coats. We do want some of that contrast, I think they're called Craighill scales, to shine through as well, just so there's a little bit of transparency. Blues are mainly transparent pigments anyway. It's very rare, unless you're using a cobalt blue, that you'll be able to get a opaque one. So and even then, only certain brands seem to come with opaque colors anyway. So this will require a few coats to get really opaque and really even coverage in the areas. But yeah, just see, I'm using it really to mark out and border all the areas of shadow that I want. Doing this actually kind of reminds me of working how fine artists work when they're kind of blocking in an image. They start with the lower value and the mid-tone, and then they build on top of that as they go. So hopefully this is starting to make sense and you're finding it useful. So once that color's on, I then go over to the turquoise. archaic turquoise, and I start applying that over the correct serial scales. And the reason for this is it gives us a nice, now this is more opaque because it's got a bit of white in it, and so it gives us a nice mid-tone to work from. So you can see I'm keeping my paint quite thin here. I would actually suggest going on a little bit thicker and not being too worried. However, I would say the thinner you work, if you are going to use oil paints on top of this, going on thinner will make your life easier when you go on with your oils, because it will give it a smoother surface to work on. You don't want to build up any texture, and I think that's what most people, including myself at the time of making this, I was trying to avoid building up any texture. The key thing here though is keeping it to all the areas that you think would receive light. So the top of the shoulder pads, the forearm, the top of the helmet, all the areas that you want to kind of bring attention to, that's where you can apply this on. And you can see me just being really careful, but really liberal with it as well. Just applying it to all the areas where I think that light is going to hit. And it's just really helping me understand the model as my brushstrokes are going over it, as I'm painting it. I'm just like getting more familiar. Now, it is a Space Marine. I've painted a lot of these in my time in this hobby, so it was a bit quick for me. But the same will be for you. You'll be able to kind of understand where all those volumes go and how you can use them to build up. So yeah, it's pretty simple like that. You can see actually how on that leg he's getting a lot of light. About the area of the shadow just underneath where his his calf is pointing towards the ground. I'm actually not going to give this too much of this brighter color. Instead, I'm just going to kind of focus on all the areas I want to bring attention to, and the kind of downward facing panels will be in shadow. So it's pretty simple. But yeah, and here I make a terrible mistake. I put on way too much water. It turns into like a wash, and I just say, okay, let me just rather than continuing to work on that, let me just leave that alone and let it dry, and it kind of ends up just messing up. So yeah, don't work too thin. Make sure you're actually drying your, and I was probably doing this off screen, but make sure you're actually drying the brush on a paper towel. Okay, so in the next area, I then go in with the Abtalon acrylics, and this is like a heavy body. It's that turquoise color you saw, and it's literally just called turquoise, making it easy. And it's really like completely different actually in terms of same hue, but it's a lot more green in it, and it's quite different to the previous archaic turquoise. Instead, it's much more on the greener side. So I started using that, and it's also high value. So I started using that to highlight the areas once my midtones have been applied. So you can see me going onto these panels, and I'm really trying to draw attention towards the top of the model. So if I was doing display painting, I would actually not use this color at the bottom half, so like the groin downwards. I wouldn't use this color. I'd actually keep it towards the chest and up. But for army painting, it is kind of about bringing attention to the entire model, so I didn't really worry about it too much. I just kind of just started applying it wherever I thought it would be cool, and wherever I felt I wanted to draw attention with that bright color. Now take notice, as because this is an acrylic sketch, I am really just focused on just marking out the volumes. Really, I'm not too bothered about being neat. I don't want there to be like a lot of blotchiness, and I don't want to start losing details, so I'm not going on thick, but I am making sure that all of those areas, there's enough pigment on my brush to actually mark out the volumes where I need them. So when I'm working on rounder shapes, I kind of curve my brush strokes. Where I work on the more cylindrical and rectangular shapes, I try to follow the direction that the volume is actually facing. So for example, this arm and this elbow, for example, and even the back of the legs, I tend to work up and down depending on like which way it's facing, and then I'll work side to side, but mainly when I'm blending, when I'm trying to pull the paint over to another direction. But you can work in any way as long as you're getting that coverage you need, really. Now, whether I'm using oils or acrylics, I actually like to use sable brushes, and in this case I'm using the Winsor Newton Series 7, and I really like these brushes. They hold a lot of paint. The miniature ones though I prefer the normal ones, so if you can get a hold of those I think they're better. The miniatures just don't seem to hold enough paint on them. Here I've mixed that colour, the turquoise, in with a pastel blue, AK's pastel blue range, which gives it this really bright colour, and in order not to use too much of it for this part of the highlights, so these are like the upper highlights now, I've mixed it in together, but afterwards I will just separate the two out and just use the pastel cyan or the pastel blue to highlight those edges. But here I'm just marking out the volumes again, but getting progressively brighter. The advantage of using oils for this process is that all of the separation in the volumes that you guys are currently seeing will be totally removed when we go in with the oils. Now the cool thing about this is, let's say I wanted to stipple up instead, and I wanted to just do loads of hashes and marks. When I went in with the oils, depending on how thickly I apply it, those brush strokes will actually stay behind and stay visible, although very subdued. So everything becomes a lot more subtle, allows you to get this really nice effect by working with transparencies. So here you can see these three greens that I'll be using. Two of them come in that kit I mentioned, and the pastel green comes in the other pastel set from AK, and I start using these for the eyes, starting with the deep green, and then I actually step up to a mixture between frog green and deep green, and then into pure frog green, and then into the pastel. And the idea between this is really just to kind of bring attention to the eyes and also get us a little bit of a gradient. That's kind of what I like to do, working in little gradients. You'll probably see this in a lot of my other models as well, that I kind of really enjoy creating these soft transition between colors, and working with really thin brushes allows you to create this kind of hash mark texture that you can get. But you do have to be careful, especially when you're working at this consistency, and at this scale rather, to make sure your consistency is like where you want it to be. I think I prefer to work with thinner paint in this case, but again, you can go up to slightly thicker ones. When you're doing stipples, you want to work with thick paint, and the reason for that is to really keep the pigment strong. Every single time we thin our paint, we are dispersing the pigment and making it slightly weaker. So if you really want there to be like strong and vivid colors and you want it to come through, then you do need to just work with unthinned paint, or the less water you can use, or medium, whatever it is that you decide to use, the easier it is for you. Here though, I start working on the black shoulder pad. So once those eyes were done, and by done I mean as far as I was going to take them, I don't want to spend too long on these features, just enough to kind of bring attention to the areas. I start working on the shoulder pad, the black, and here I've mixed in a tiny bit of that neutral grey into my abyssal blue, or abyssal blue, and I start trying to apply it again, just a bit too much water, a bit too thin, and start to give me a bit of difficulty, to be honest. I think just getting used to using acrylics again in this way definitely meant I was out of practice from all the work I'd been doing on my oil paint. So it was a nice learning experience, just really actually to slow down and take my time, and also just practicing with what colors or how these colors were going to look on the model. The strangest thing for me with acrylics is how they kind of hide themselves from view. Like you apply on the model, and then you'll quickly see that when it dries so much lighter than when it was applied, and so much less vivid. Whereas oil paints, they really do just dry exactly as you saw them. So what you see is what you'll get, which is really nice. So It does take a little bit of getting used to, but the important thing here is to keep your brush strokes quite small. Depending on how realistic you want to get with this or how stylized, my style is more on the kind of expressive stylized side, so you can take a little bit of liberties with your how you sketch out and mark out your volumes. Of course, all of this can be blended and smoothed out later on in the process, so try not to worry too much. You just want to kind of just use it as a canvas and play around, and as long as you're getting the volumes in the right place, by the end of this process it will end up looking pretty cool. I'm getting progressively lighter, but you can see there that my volumes are getting even smaller as I'm working, and that's the kind of way you should approach. So I actually lost the footage, but I did just do a very quick glaze of a Abaddon Black contrast over the surface there, and here you can see me now. We've now switched over to oil paints, and the cool thing about this is just making sure you are color matching. Now for this I ended up using some colors from AK. I used their blue-green color and their turquoise. I think it's just called turquoise. I'll tag it in the comment section below. But you can see there that I'm working with very thin paint, very small amounts of paint. Oil paints do have a thicker consistency naturally, so well, I guess there are some brands you can get, such as Amamig, which come pre-thinned, but I find that just working with thick paint lets me be a little bit more controlled, and I can have a bit more control over the dilution and the results that I get. So here, for example, you can see how smooth I'm being and how cautious I'm being. Now, when you're blending, the tricky part is making sure that you don't blend too far into an opposite side. I think majority of painters would call this wet blending. However, you're kind of doing it on the model, you're doing it on the model and you've got a lot more time for it to dry. So more so than acrylic wet blending, oils are just perfect for this. But that's not their only advantage. Actually, again, like I've mentioned, that aesthetic, that kind of brightness, that vibrancy is exactly what the model will look like on that hand. Is exactly what the model will look like once it's dried. So it makes this process really enjoyable because you know exactly what you're going to be getting. A common misunderstanding with oil paints is that you can't layer on top of them very easily, especially when working with thin paint. But as you can see, I actually did this all in one sitting. So I sat here for like an hour and a half, and it was really easy, really quick, because I'm working with slightly thinned paint. The consistency and especially using Sansador allows the pigment to dry much faster and allows you to layer on top of it. So here, for example, I'm working on the wrist band, I guess it's called, and you can see I'm using a wider volume, but because it's quite shiny, you can see that it's thinned, and then I go straight over it in between the area that I wanted to blend with another color, so in this case the kind of mid-tone, and I'm slowly blending in towards the shadow. Here I use phthalo blue, which is like a slightly green shade, a green tint towards it, and I just use that as my shadow color. I'm not too worried about like making the blends perfect, because we can actually come back to this later on in the process. I'm just marking in the values and then smoothing out what I can be bothered to, really, what I can in that time. And then I just see that I'm doing my little rebound light to show that this armor is slightly shinier, more like a satin, not a full gloss. So I didn't want to go crazy and start doing all these crazy reflections in there. But yeah, so here that little glaze of paint is what I call the prime glaze. It's a technique I developed, allowing me to layer on top, and you can see here how the paint just blends really nicely. Now the longer you leave that, the more the color that you're going to put on top will shine through. If you apply it when the model is still a bit too wet, like it was there, you'll end up kind of mixing the pigments together, which you might not necessarily want. But for me, I'm so used to doing this now, and understanding how long it will take to dry, what I can get away with. I kind of just tend to go over it almost immediately. So here though, you can see me, again, this is in real time, so I've had to give the model like a couple seconds really to dry before I apply over it. And then this is the effect, so you get to see actually how it all comes in, and I'm just making sure that I'm leaving enough time and enough space in between each of those volumes, and then just going over it with the shadow color to bring the two together, and again that rebound. So you are just kind of repeating the process, making sure all the volumes match up, and yeah, you can just play around. You can add in other colors, you can add in like magenta, greens, oranges if you really want to, and you'll get this really interesting combination of colors shining through. So you can see there that I'm using the same brush. I've actually just made sure there was very little, well, next to no water on it, so I dried it out, and then I basically go over with, dip it in a little bit of Sansador, dip that, just a tip into Sansador, then I dip the tip of my paint into the tip of my paint, and into my paint with my brush tip, and I start applying over those areas. And you can see that I'm kind of like playing around with the areas of the volume, just to get an understanding. And it's funny, on camera you can see a slight thickness to the paint, but in the eye you can't see that at all. But all of this can be blended away as well, and you'll naturally do it as you take the colors. So you can see there, taking that blue-green from AK and just smoothing it on top of to the ears where I need it, and just into the shadow. So just making sure that the area that sticks out towards the light is what's getting that highlighted color. And the process is pretty much the same regardless of where you are working on the model. So at this point I'd done the face, and now I was doing the shoulder pad, and you can see as I'm pulling the colors down in towards that shadow area, and you can see the kind of effects I'm getting. Just kind of turning it, looking, I'm observing what I need to do, and you can spend a lot longer on this if you want to. But again, just for army painting, I want to actually be able to play with these. Well, actually, that's a lie. I've already got my army. This was mainly for a charity event, so I wanted to do this to make sure that the colors on top here were easy replicable by whoever would win them. And this charity focuses on baby loss. And I felt it was like really important to get involved in this when I was arts. So yeah, I'll put a link in below if you're interested in entering that raffle. So here you can see once I'd done that first layer of paint, I'd already covered quite a bit of the areas for smoothing out and just removing some of that those gaps between the texture. So once I've done that and I've blended out all the areas I need to, I can then go in with a pin wash. And here I'm just being very careful. Now, I know that a lot of people use black for this, but I do encourage you to try with a coloured pin wash just to make your shadows a little bit more interesting. I could have used a purple here, but I thought, it's quite nice to keep it simple and just use some blue. We can just use the same colours, the same like 3 colours I've been using in this tutorial to kind of do everything here. And so I just go in, and the cool thing about this is that the model is already dry enough to allow me to do this. So at this point, like I said, I've been working on it for about an hour, and in that time all the areas that I had worked on initially have begun to completely dry, which allowed me to go into these areas and start applying in that pin wash without interrupting the layers on top. So this is really nice. It also creates some separation in the elements. When you're spending so much time on blending, you forget to focus on definition because everything becomes quite soft, and it is something I see in my own models as well as other models painted with oils, just focus too much on the blending. So I definitely encourage you to go back in, look at how you can separate the elements of the model so that areas really stick out, and you can just focus on bringing those up to the level where you need them to. So here you can, for example, you can see that the kind of shadows are popping in now, and it's really helpful for creating just a separation and definition and understanding what element or what part component fits with what. So yeah, this is like kind of what I do. I look around the model, I look into all of those areas, and the Space Marine, the Mark 6s, I think the Mark 3s as well, the new Mark 3s have this really lovely areas for just adding in these dark lines of the model. Try not to focus too much on just applying the paint and dropping it in and letting it do the work. Oils are good for that, but I do think it's good practice, especially for your brush control, to get used to manually doing that and just letting the oils assist you. But I am trying to keep my brush quite thin and allow me to go into all those areas to smooth it out. Okay, so coming up to the next part, I start sketching out the black here and making it a little bit more interesting. So I've taken in some lamp black, which is semi-opaque, a tiny bit of Gamblin's Portland grey, which has a little bit of blue in it, and I've mixed them together and just started to use them in thin layers to build up this black volume. Shoulder pads used to give me so much trouble for some reason. I think it's just like the confusing shape of them, like they're basically a sphere, but they turn into this like elongated cylinder towards the bottom. But you do just have to like get used to it and then just work around it. And here you can see how thin that paint is. This is going to be mostly covered up, unfortunately, by a decal anyway, but it's just nice to have some color in there as well. So another alternative is to use a lamp black and a peridine black as well, and then adds a little bit of white to it, and you'll get this kind of nice greenish looking black. I do the same thing on the bolter, and you can see I'm just kind of working in like thin layers as well. The tactic to keep this paint really thin but give you this nice effect is to just actually do a little bit more texture with acrylics first, and then go on top of that texture with oil paint in the same consistency, and it will just empower the oils on top. So it's actually really nice, a nice way to work. But you can see here, I just start marking in all of those areas. And here is a quick way to do these metal studs, and you could, and I will actually, when I do finish off my Saboteur, I will be going into a lot of detail on how to highlight these, add rebound lights, where to add them placement. But for now, for this, you can just apply grey first and then build up on top of that with progressively brighter highlights in the areas to bring up the attention of where you want them to be, and then add in a shadow underneath to just add a bit of contrast and make them seem a lot more metallic than they are. When I'm working with oils, I can work with either normal metallics and then add on some oil metallics on top, but I feel like it was just more fun and more simple just to create your kind of very quick and fake NNM. I say fake NNM because I'm not putting in as nearly much reflections as would be required for it to be hyper convincing, but this is enough to get by at that army scale level. So I've realized that army painting is mainly about finding shortcuts that allow you to get the job done whilst also looking nice and looking kind of vibrant, and bringing people's attention to the army as a whole. But for like characters, you can really go to town and bring out more detail. So for the last part of this video, I start going in with my brightest highlights, and I'm actually color matching the pastel colors that we used in the acrylic stage. Now, the cool thing about oil paints is that they are more vibrant, they are more vivid. If you use artist grade paints, you'll have an easier time. Here I'm purposely using standard or student grade paints or miniature grade paints, just to make it a bit more accessible. If I was doing this for a competition, or if I was trying to do like a display miniature or a commission, I would be using artist grade, and that would give me a lot more power, a lot more strength and vibrancy, just due to the pigment loads in the artist grade paints, which just absolutely decimates all the other colors, all the other kind of brands out there. But here, just using that thin layers of paint, I'm going over all those areas, stippling, just making marks and just adding in highlights to further separate. Now, this is something I've been doing more and more to help me create that separation on my miniatures. It is something that I struggled with. I find it so boring, if I'm honest, but it does make a huge difference when you've got those highlights in and when you haven't. It just makes things a lot easier to read, especially at a distance, which is what this is mainly for. So you can see I'm just being super thin. I'm going over those areas that I've already kind of gone over again before, and then going over them again. I'm making sure that my paint is fairly thin. I'm sticking to the tip and sides of my brush to kind of give me those edge highlights. And you'll notice actually the whole way through this process, I've only been using one brush. I have been practicing with just not using my blending brush to give me a stronger and better use of brush control. Just making sure I'm just using that one brush to do everything. It does help actually quite a bit. It means that I'm actually able to get over to these areas. I'm not relying on the two brush technique in order to help me out. I'm just kind of doing everything intentionally the first time. So you can see even here at the back, just making those marks, and I will go in later and do a slight highlight to the black padding as well. But yeah, it does help a lot, and it does create a lot more separation to these elements. And that is the end of the tutorial. If you want to know how I've done the base and the decals, then you please check out my tutorial on the Crimson Fist and the Lictor Alpha, where I go over pretty much all the techniques you would need to know. Now, this was a very basic tutorial, mainly aimed at army painting and just making the scheme really accessible. I will be doing this scheme in a lot more detail on my Patreon, as well as the original Indigo scheme that you've seen before. So if you do have any questions, feel free to shoot a message or join in on the Patreon and help support the channel. Okay guys, love you lots, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in another video. And if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, there should be a link in the bio to my Patreon. Thank you to all my loyal patrons, you make this possible. Bye for now.